I have an interesting story I'd like to share with you all, one that I feel is rather unique compared to most, and I'd like to hopefully get some answers if at all possible. So, my story starts when I was about 11 years old, 2002 in southern CA. My mother had found a new boyfriend who lived up in the mountains. You see, I've lived in the city most of my life and was excited to hear that he lived practically in the middle of nowhere. Weird, I know, but as it turns out I was born with autism and never really liked all the loud noises that come from the city, plus he had 2 ponies on the property. I was always closer to animals than people, so the idea of meeting a new animal was enough for me to go along for a visit. A few months pass and every so often my mother and I would visit his home. As I got familiar with the place and the animals, they would sometimes leave me alone for an hour or so to go out on a date. Maybe that would seem insane nowadays, but I was perfectly fine with being alone. My mother, however, had one rule for me: never to leave the property, and if someone came by I didn't know, then to get inside and wait until we came home. This is where the story starts. My mother had left with her boyfriend almost half an hour ago and I was bored with staying inside, so I decided to go outside to spending time with the ponies. There were 2 of them, one was named Cinnamon and the other Colt. Not very original, I know, but that's what they were called. Usually when I came over, the 2 of them would wait by the fence until I came over to play with them, but today I noticed that Cinnamon wasn't there. I just chalked it up to her probably being in the stable and instead went over to Colt and pet him for a few minutes. That's when things got weird. I heard a whinny of sorts coming from the forest. I looked over to the forest edge, as you could easily see from the house to the forest without anything getting in the way, and what I saw standing there was what looked like Cinnamon. She stood there, almost motionless, as she looked directly at me. Colt seemed to notice what I was looking at, and as soon as he turned to look, he started snorting and pawing at the ground. I'd never seen him behave like this before, but I looked up to the forest and noticed Cinnamon was walking in. I was worried that she had gotten out and would get lost. So, my childlike mind thought the only thing I could do was to give chase and try to get her back. I ran into the forest looking for her, but it oddly seemed as if she was just out of reach whenever I spotted her. This is where the encounter is odd and what I'd really like closure on. Soon, I couldn't see Cinnamon anywhere. She was gone, no longer any trace of her. I looked around and realized I was lost in the woods and had no way of finding my way home. That's when I heard it. It sounded like 2 dogs mauling one another. I was terrified at this point, as the sounds were really close to me and there were even screams mixed into it. I'll be honest, those screams still haunt me to this day. As I stood there, stuck in terror, I noticed something in the corner of my eye peek around from a tree. I shakily looked over and saw what looked like a deer looking at me. However, I couldn't see the back end of its body, as if it stood on 2 legs and was hiding behind the tree. At this point I was afraid and confused by what was happening. The deer was looking at me like Cinnamon did, but then its mouth fell open slack and I heard it whisper something to me. "Are you lost?" Its mouth didn't move as it spoke, just stayed open slack. Even though I was terrified out of my mind, I nodded. It hadn't moved an inch as it spoke again. "Follow me." It moved behind the tree, hiding itself, but then I noticed it peer from behind a different tree that was further down the path. I vividly remembering that I had no idea where I was or what this creature was, but I had no choice but to follow it. Every time I got closer to it, it would hide and appear behind another tree moments later. Never once did I see it walk from one tree to another. It felt like hours had gone by. Even as the light in the forest quickly faded, I was still led by this creature through the forest. Finally the creature peered around one last tree, its mouth fell open like it did before and it spoke one last time. "Go home." I could see that where it hid, just behind it, was my home. The flashing of blue and red lights could be seen coming from the front of the house. As I walked towards the edge of the forest, I stopped and looked at the tree where the creature hid. I had no idea if it was even there anymore, but I felt compelled to thank it for helping me. I didn't get a response, and I didn't even hear anything move from within the forest. When I got home, my mother was crying and the police were there. Needless to say, I was punished for leaving the house, and later that month my mother broke up with her boyfriend, not because of the incident, mind you. I never did get to return to that house, nor did I ever have another encounter such as this one. To this day I have no idea what happened, but I get the feeling that whatever that dear creature was, it saved me from the thing that was impersonating Cinnamon. This memory has always bothered me, and for most of my life I've just chalked it up to my terrified childlike mind creating these events, but something deep down makes me believe otherwise. I don't know. Could this have been a skinwalker? If so, why was I helped? So much about this bothers me, and chances are my questions will never be answered.